to consider is the subdivision of the lungs, right? So the right side has 3 lobes, 10 segments. The left side has 2 lobes, 8 segments. Again, it's good to know the lobes because if there's a problem, there's a cancer, there's a damage, then we can remove a lobe, right? A lobectomy, and that's not okay, but it's okay, right? So it's good to know which one has 3, which one has 2. They don't usually test on those specifics, but it's good to know that there are lobes. It's not just one solid lung, right? Then it's the alveoli. So now, of all the parts of the lungs or lung anatomy, the alveoli, in my opinion, is the most important because that's where the gas exchange occurs. So what is the alveoli? They're tiny distal air sacs where gas exchange takes place, and there's a production of surfactant. So let's pause there a little bit, right? So visually, what would that look like? So if you would, you know, the little balloons that we play water balloon fight with, they're tiny little balloons. Think of the alveoli of those tiny little balloons all blown up right around each other. Like there's this I own a summer camp, right? And so I remember when I used to do water fights, it was just like a headache to like fill up all these water balloons, right? And so then I bought this device online on Amazon where you put the thing in the hose and then there's like all these balloons that are surrounded and they fill up all at once. Well, that's the alveoli. They all fill up all at once. And then if I remove the hose and I remove the water, they all close all at once. And that's exactly how it works. So funny how your nursing brain works when you're kind of thinking about imagery and all, but that's exactly how it works. And in the same idea, if I had to, let's say, blow up just one of those little alveoli or just one of those little balloons, the first time I blow it up, it is so hard, right? As a matter of fact, if I give it to a child whose lungs are not as developed as mine and who doesn't have as much strength as I do, it's almost impossible for them to blow it, right? They're like, and they can't because it's like the elasticity of the balloon is too fresh and too taut and too strong, and their little breath cannot expand it, right? It's the same idea when we see in pediatrics or in OB, I should say, that when that baby is opening the lungs for the first time, it is that difficult, right? And so it takes a lot of stress and a lot of pressure and a lot just to inflate those. But you see this little surfactant here, this little surfactant here, that aids in that expansion. And how do we think about that? Well, in the same imagery of that little balloon, if I put it to my mouth and I inflate, right? When I inflate the balloon, then I'm able to expand it, right? Hold on one moment, guys. I just want to make sure. Yes, I sometimes I'm afraid if I'm on mute, but I am not on mute and you can see me good. So when we see the little balloon, right? So when you inflate it, the first time that you do, your saliva goes into the balloon, and when it's deflated, the next time you're going to inflate it, it is so much easier. And that's because the elastic of the balloon has already stretched, and the lubricant, your saliva has lubricated it and allowed it for movement. The surfactant that the lungs produce do exactly that. They allow for the lungs to be able to expand continuously every single time in a smooth fashion with agility and just exactness and just with ease, right? Whereas if you didn't have surfactant, it's not going to be easy. So when we jump to OB, when we think about OB, that baby who is premature, right, and who cannot produce or has not yet produced surfactant because the lungs are the last or is the last organ to be developed. And so when a child is born prematurely, they did not yet develop the lungs properly. And so they do not yet have surfactant. So they don't have this fluid which will help the lungs expand or the alveoli to expand. And so when they're born, every breath is like that first breath that you're trying to breathe into that balloon, right? And that is a horrible thing, because imagine how much strength and how hard it is. Like your cheeks hurt, right? You can't, it's hard for that baby, right? And so what they will do is they will give the medication inside the belly. and outside the belly to help them develop their lungs so that they can build surfactant. Now, we as adults, going back to this, right? We as adults, we have surfactant like continually being produced. And you think, well, how do we produce it, surfactant? And how does it happen every once in a while? And it's amazing to know that every time you sigh, you produce surfactant, which is interesting because you sigh because of stress, you sigh because of exhaustion, you sigh for many different reasons. But as you sigh, it helps your lungs expand and move and function the way it's supposed to. And I think that's just like so amazing, right? So without surfactant, the lung would collapse, right? It would not be able to expand. It'll just stay flat because the stretch is just too much. Oxygen is required for surfactant production. So we need oxygen in order to produce surfactant, right? Now, diffusion. Diffusion is the exchange of gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, at the capillary membrane, right? So again, we talked about oxygen coming to the alveoli, but remember that everything in your body, in order for it to really work, it has to get into your bloodstream, right? So the air can't just enter into the alveoli and just like float around, right? It has to find its way into the alveoli bloodstream, so to speak, right? And so then once it gets there, that's when the oxygen enters and the carbon dioxide comes out. But what is it doing? Is it just like pushing it in and out of the air? No, it's doing it in the blood vessels, right? And so we know the anatomy of blood vessels are arteries to arterioles to capillaries, right? And the capillaries is where the real exchange happens. And the capillaries then can connect to venules and then veins, right? And then the exchange of deoxygenated. And when we talk about it, we'll see that when we talk about, let's say, cardiac and how the blood flows in the heart, how in order for the blood to have oxygenated blood, it has to get it from the lungs, right? So just very quickly, and you guys, if you've heard me before, you know, I give it all, right? Because in order to understand nursing fully, you have to have the whole picture. And unfortunately, when you're in school, they give you a little bit of pieces, right? First you do lungs, then you do heart, then you do OB, then, but when you have the whole picture, which I can give you, it helps you understand it better. And then when you go back and then you dissect it, you're like, oh, that's what it means. And that's why it's this way, right? So with the cardiac, it has to go from the atrium to the ventricle, then to the lungs to get the oxygen, right? And then come back to the left side for the ventricles, the arteries, then the ventricles, then to the body. So again, our bloodstream has to collect our oxygen in order to pump it throughout our body. And where does it come from? It comes from our lungs, right? This whole diffusion. And when you think about diffusion, right, you think of dispersing, you think of spreading. So it spreads the oxygen around and then it collects the carbon dioxide in order for you to then exhale it, right? So again, this basic information that you must know. You inhale oxygen, it goes into your bloodstream once it gets into the alveoli, and then it has to be exchanged so that the body accepts the oxygen. But once it takes in the oxygen, it has to replace that oxygen with carbon dioxide, which will then be brought back into the lungs so that you can expel that. The carbon dioxide is the toxin that you expel, and you get that only after you get that exchange of oxygen, right? So moving on, we have the factors affecting airflow. So normal airflow are open, moist, intact, and non-inflamed, right? So meaning the nose can be inflamed, it has to be open, it has to, the airway has to be clear, right? We have, when a person has like, you know, they can't breathe through one nostril, you know how annoying that is, that even though it's like the other one is open, it's like just annoying, right? So it needs to be all open, moist, good, intact, good, inflammation free. And that includes the trachea, right? The trachea also has to be opened, moist, intact. Now, cilia clears foreign bodies. So what is cilia? So your nose have hairs, right? Some people have really long hairs and you're like, oh, they need to trim that, right? But the hair is important. It's there to trap particles that would otherwise stop you from breathing properly, or that would either travel into your alveoli or your lungs and cause pollutants to cause problems there. So we want to trap it and expel it when we sneeze, right? Or when we blow our noses. But the hairs are only inside your nose. There are no hairs in your trachea. But what your trachea does have is a different kind of hair, but it's not really hair. It's called cilia. It's a hair-like structure because it's like it has it's a long structure and it moves like this, right? And what it does is it traps particles just as the hairs do, but it also like it kind of moves debris along, like mucus that can help wash the area. And so this cilia is all the way up to the bronchioles, right? So the bronchiolus does not have it. So there's a limit to it. And that's important as well, right? It's important to know that if you allow debris, it's a smoke and anything to go past that, it's going to get inside the lungs, which means inside the alveoli, and you won't be able to get it out, right? So that's why it's important when you're working in places that have debris, that have smoke, where that has chemicals, that you wear your mask, right? Because the mask is that filtering for you, the external filter, and then the little bit that comes in, the hairs catch it, the little bit that goes past that, the cilia catches, the little bit that catches that, the mucus catches it. And then if you bypass that, well, you're kind of messed up because the alveoli cannot withstand particles in it and it will not be able to expel it. And that can cause cancers, that can cause trauma, that could cause inflammation, that can cause eventually chronic lung failure, and that can kill you, right? For more information on how to register for classes and get help from our tutoring center, visit www.gab-nicnursingtutor.com. That is www.gabnicnursingtutor.com. To view our free or paid classes, sign up on www.thinkific.com. That's www.thinkific.com and register for the pre-recorded classes of your choice after searching for the Gab-Nic Tutoring Center uploads. We offer in-person tutoring and Zoom calls. You can also find us on YouTube for more free classes and tips on how to do better in nursing. We are also on Facebook, where we upload articles, tips, and tricks on how you can make your journey to becoming a nurse smooth and near effortless. Did I mention Instagram? Basically, we are everywhere. So check us out or call 917-602-9927 and we will tell you just how to join. See you soon.